Welcome to Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips, where we talk all things addictions, codependency, relationships, and the good, bad, and ugly in between. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips. Today, we have something cool on the agenda. A friend of mine has sent me a couple of questions for me to answer live on the podcast. I think it's interesting as I've started this business and this podcast, and as the years have gone by, I'm starting to get to know myself a little bit better, thank God. And what I've come to realize is that content creation is actually quite difficult. So I feel like I have a newfound appreciation for even people who create like really funny, silly content on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of creativity, and it's a tough thing to do. So what I have learned about myself is that anytime I'm in conversation with someone or working with a client or talking with a friend or being interviewed on somebody else's podcast, the information just kind of flows out of me. And what was starting to happen is that I was kind of working from home and putting aside some time to record or to create some content. And I would hit the record button and my mind would go just blank. Like I had nothing upstairs and nothing to talk about, which was super frustrating to move through. And one really helpful skill that I have developed along the way is asking for help when I'm stuck. That used to be something that was very difficult for me, and I would just kind of sit in the discomfort of just like spinning out, or maybe like some stubbornness and really trying to figure it out on my own. And it's interesting because I used to watch either like my dad do that and just be so stubborn when it came to like asking for directions or asking somebody in the store for wherever something was. And I'd be like, oh my God, get over yourself. Can you just please ask so we can go home? And now here I am 38 years later doing the same thing and choosing to be like super stubborn for whatever reason. So I have decided to no longer do that. Anyway, so I went for a walk with a good friend of mine, and they're also in the same kind of coaching industry. And I was talking about my issue or my paralysis that I was experiencing when I would hit the record button. And they were like, well, since you seem to be comfortable answering questions, why don't you kind of do it just like interview style, and somebody send in the questions for you and you can answer them. So that is exactly what I'll be doing for the next however many episodes. So they sent a few, which was super helpful. But the one that jumped out the most to me was, are there specific communication strategies that can benefit couples where one partner has a secure attachment style and the other has an insecure attachment style? And I love this question. I love this question for many reasons. Number one being I spent the majority of my life wildly insecurely attached, and it took me until I was in my 30s to realize how problematic it was becoming in not only romantic relationships, but it can really kind of bleed through all types of relationships. Could have been relationships with my colleagues, with a boss, with friends. I was pretty lucky in terms of not feeling super anxious amongst friendships. I know a lot of people can get really worked up to say they feel like a friend is pulling away from them or they haven't returned their call. Luckily, I'm a natural born isolator and introvert that if somebody cancels plans on me, I'm okay with it. But it was very different when it came to romantic relationships. So there was something happening that when I was intimately connected with somebody and I would feel that disconnection, I would really start to panic, and can still fall into that trap today if I am not with an appropriately suited partner, meaning, and we'll get into this either in today's episode or another episode, but really an attachment style that doesn't pair well with mine can still cause a lot of reactivity in my life today. So it's something that I try to be very careful of. But let's kind of break this down. So they're asking, what are some communication strategies between a securely attached individual and an insecurely attached individual? So let's kind of differentiate the two to start with. I think that will be helpful. So what is secure attachment? What is attachment in general? I know I talk a lot about this, but maybe if it's your first time listening, welcome. Thank you for listening. But let's kind of break this down into some smaller chunks. So attachment style is basically a theory to describe what a child can go through fundamentally between the ages of birth and 10, but really between birth and around age 3. So back in the 80s, there was a lot of studies done where they were observing the attachment styles from children who were taken away from their mothers. And it was super interesting where one child would kind of experience nothing when the mother would leave the room, and they would be left with their toys and maybe a couple other kids, and they would just kind of go with the flow, maybe look around a little bit, like where did mom go, but no sense of panic. And then you'd see more of an insecure leaning child would completely panic when the mother would leave the room. And it's just so interesting, right? Like, especially when I look back at my own history, where things that I would deem to be quite normal back then, when I look back now, knowing what I know, were really not that normal. My I had a really hard time, like, even being left at a sleepover at a friend's house, and not a stranger, like a friend that I would know well. My parents would know their parents, and I remember it being like, 11 p.m., 12 a.m., just panicking, and I would pretend that I was sick. I would need to come home. I just felt very, very, very insecure being out of my own home. So basically, in a nutshell, secure attachment looks like a child growing up in a home where they were taught how to regulate their nervous system, where a lot of their needs were met. And they knew deep down that if there was an issue, if they were scared, maybe they told a lie or got in trouble, but they knew that they could go to their parents or their primary caregivers without too much difficulty, and that the security would be restored after. And this is not to say, I know tons of securely attached individuals. It's not to say that there was no conflict in the home or there were no problems or fights or whatever it is. Of course, I don't think I know anybody who grew up without any of that. But fundamentally, the energy in the home was quite consistent and secure. And there was a lot of communication. So, say the child, toddler, preteen, whatever it was crying and freaking out about something, right? They would be raised with parents who were able to say, like, hey, wow, those are some big feelings that you're having right now. Why don't we go sit down, or why don't we take a walk and talk about this? Versus a lot of other people who grew up with parents who, and this is not about blaming or shaming, they're not capable of doing it themselves and they were never raised in that way. But that's a much different experience than somebody, crying as a child and the parent saying either, for example, oh my God, stop crying, you're crying again. Boys don't cry, girls don't cry, whatever it is. And really not validating the experience that the child is having. Now, that's not to say that every secure child growing up had, this opportunity to talk through every single one of their feelings. Sometimes kids are just being brats and they know they're being brats. That's a different story. This is really, an undercurrent of constantly either having your feelings validated or invalidated. So that's a secure attachment style. So basically, kid would come home from school, they would know like mom and dad were there or whoever the primary caregivers were, and they were relatively going to be in a pretty stable mood, right? A lot of insecure attachment can grow up from parents who were struggling with, could be borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, alcoholism. Narcissistic personality disorder, right? If you come home to any of those disorders as a kid, you might not know what parent is actually or what version of that parent is going to open the door at that moment. So securely attached kids, they were met with consistency when they would come home from school, other than the odd normal fight between the parents or whatever it was, or stress, but an overall sense of consistency. And what tends to happen is that securely attached individuals, because they have a strong sense of self, they they grow up, they continue with that sense of self. So once they enter high school, once they enter CJEP or college or university or trade school, whatever it is, they know who they are. They're not kind of searching for like, why do I feel this way, or trying to numb out with certain behaviors. They fundamentally have been able to explore who they are in their home. And it's a lot easier for them to get into romantic relationships, to pursue careers, to take care of their health. For example, engaging in sports or consistent exercise or eating well. Those are all results of growing up in a secure home. On the contrary, growing up in an insecure home, that starts to look like growing up and not knowing who you are. And when you don't know who you are, what tends to happen, especially in adolescence or high school, is that you are going to become prey to peer pressure, to maybe doing things that you don't necessarily want to do, getting into your first romantic relationship and becoming a chameleon and really figuring out what the other person needs long before realizing what you need. And what comes with that, and what's difficult, is that you don't realize it at the time, but a ton of self-abandonment, right? Because if I'm so busy figuring out what you need, there's no time or exploration done to figure out what I need. So those are the two kind of biggest differences, right? So we have a securely attached individual, and now we have an insecurely attached individual. So it's interesting because I talk a lot about the anxious and avoidant dance that a lot of people do. So more often than not, um, anxiously attached individuals or avoidantly attached individuals will not actually be initially attracted to securely attached people. They will be attracted to the opposite insecure attachment of their own. So, for example, if I've grown up anxiously attached with two avoidant parents, chances are I'm going to be attracted to avoidant partners. It's the type of love that I know. It's what I'm comfortable with. Maybe I grew up kind of hustling for love, or feeling like I was being ignored for a couple of days, let's say, and then by the third day, getting a few breadcrumbs of love. And then I'm like, ooh, this feels great. And what that creates now is this kind of addictive cycle of like, when can I get that feeling again? So, if I'm growing up insecurely attached, and say in high school, for example, somebody more secure comes towards me with, wearing their heart on their sleeve and saying like, oh, like, I like you so much and I'm ready for this relationship. I don't know what that looks like, right? That to me can be very, very unnerving, because if you're not used to that type of love and you didn't grow up with that, I have a lot of anxious people, myself included, back in the day, that would actually be highly turned off by that, because it seems almost like suffocating. It's very, very intense, and something that we were not used to growing up with. So chances are I'm actually going to probably be pursuing more avoidant people, or whatever your case may be. whatever you've grown up with in your home. Say you actually had a mother who was struggling with bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder, and their moods were all over the place. Chances are you're going to grow up and you're going to start to be more attracted to anxious people, maybe with their own mental health issues, because that's what you know. But for the sake of this question, we'll put that aside and talk about that in another episode. But what specific communication strategies can be helpful for a securely attached person and an insecurely attached person? So this is actually a great pairing because at the end of the day, anybody who's in recovery from being anxiously attached or being avoidantly attached, they actually do better with a securely attached person. But that can take a long time to realize, and it can take a long time to become comfortable to try to date somebody secure. But let's just say we're at that place, and that's the pairing that we have. Insecure attachment style is a tricky one because they can present as very confident at the beginning, very charming, very charismatic, very caring, and they kind of check all the boxes. They're really like they're energetic, they're into a lot of different things, they're extremely intuitive. So going back to what I said earlier about being able to pick up on what other people need before themselves, like they've been trained to do that their entire lives. So by the time they start dating, they're very, very good at it. So it looks quite attractive, but what happens is a lot of anxious people hide the fact that they're anxious at the beginning of dating. And that's really one major tip that I share to my clients often on social media often is really not hiding who you are anymore when you're dating, especially when you're blind dating or online dating. Because what happens if we start to present a version of ourselves that's not accurate, we're really in for like, who knows, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year of problems, essentially just problems at the end of the day. Because and I'm not saying first date start kind of trauma dumping and let everybody know how anxious you are and what that looks like. No, you definitely can warm up to that, but I think it saves ourselves so much time and so much grief if we all can just start to be a little bit more honest about who we are at the beginning. But with anxious attachment, and you know, there's two different versions of insecurely attached people. So whether you're struggling with anxious attachment or avoidant attachment, there can be those two types of people who are either doing the work or not doing the work, right? So if I am anxiously attached and I have no idea, or I'm just kind of living in those character flaws, we're going to be having a different conversation. But for the sake of this episode, let's say we're talking about an anxiously attached individual who knows that they're anxiously attached and who are actively engaged and really trying their best to do the work. I think there's a lot of communication strategies that can be put into place, right? Because awareness is the number one, it's the key to a lot of things in life. If I'm unaware of a behavior, how am I supposed to acknowledge it? How am I supposed to change it? I don't even know what's going on. I don't even know there's something wrong. So that's a whole other can of worms. But let's say this specific insecurely attached person is trying their best and they know, what happens when they freak out. A lot of strategies would look like, okay, so let's predict a conflict coming. So it's Friday night. Let's say the secure person is still at work and the anxious person hasn't heard from their partner in a couple of hours and they start to panic. So, one of the biggest triggers for an insecurely attached person is this feeling of disconnection. So the moment that they feel a partner pulling away from them, what tends to happen is they can start to create a story in their minds that their partner doesn't care anymore, that their partner is going to leave them, that some type of impending doom is coming. So what happens is that this narrative starts to play and then their actions start to match the narrative. So, one really helpful strategy to talk about before these conflicts come is how can the anxious person safely discuss how they're feeling before getting to a 10 on 10 on the reactivity scale, let's say. So, what's super cool about communication strategies is number one, talking about them when you're not activated. There are no types of strategies that are going to come out when you're a 10 on 10 activated and you're freaking out or yelling at the other person. The person, whether they're secure, avoidant, whatever they are, they're going to probably shut down and the conversation is going to go nowhere. So, a really helpful strategy to discuss with a more secure partner is what is the best way to articulate to you that I'm panicking? And then it gives the partner a chance to be like, okay, well, if you're panicking, let's say, and I'm at work and I'm in a meeting, well, I'm not going to be able to answer. Um, so, talking about whatever situation that you're in specifically with your partner, about how you guys can learn how to co regulate, but more importantly, too, how the insecure person can learn how to self-regulate. So, number one tip would be creating these strategies when you're not activated. Number two would be put a plan in place, because if this is an anxious person that's doing the work, it's probably safe to say that these kind of anxiety, freak out, panic attacks are not going to happen every single week. So let's say they happen quarterly. Let's say they happen 4 times a year. Put a plan in place for when they do happen. So, something that doesn't involve co-regulation is really the insecure person learning how to self-regulate before they engage in conversation. That would probably be my first or second most important strategy as well. And that's less to do about the communication between the two of you, but it will help the communication because, when I used to spin out in an anxiety spiral, I I couldn't have a proper conversation anymore. I would cry, I would yell, I would send paragraph text messages, I would blow up the person's phone. I was completely dysregulated and freaking out. So, one of the best things that I've learned how to do is to try to take that regulation from a 10 on 10 to at least a 5 or a 6 on 10. And that can look like going for a walk, just doing something physical, doing something that requires my hands and my brain so that it kind of cuts the cycle of overthinking in the moment. So it can go look like, walking out onto my balcony barefoot and, picking some of the flowers if it's summertime, cleaning off a table, doing some laundry, going for a walk. And if you're really panicking and you don't think any of those are going to be helpful, call somebody. Call somebody who's not your partner, that will be able to listen without being emotionally attached or overly involved into what you're saying. Because the moment we try to co-regulate with somebody who loves us or who is romantically involved with us, it there's going to be a high chance that they're going to take a lot of what you're saying very personally in the moment, and it might not work out the way you wanted it to work out. So, number one, um, specific communication strategies is making your plan together. So your plan as a couple, if the other person is panicking, or has needs, talk about some ways or talk about, when is the best time to bring these things up. I used to be notorious at bringing up really important things at like 10 or 11 p.m. when the other person was exhausted and ready to go to bed. But because I was so dysregulated, I felt like I needed to talk about whatever was going on or else I wouldn't sleep. So there was a lot of I involved, right? A lot of self involved in that. So yeah, so planning on times that you can talk. I've suggested to a lot of couples that they do either weekly or monthly check-in meetings. That can be really helpful, and that can be a way to eliminate things piling up or a lot of situations kind of being brushed under the rug or going unsaid, it's a great way to say, like, okay, it's Friday evening or Saturday morning or whenever you guys like to do these things together, and just say, hey, okay, let's sit down for a meeting. Even if nothing had gone wrong that week, it's still super helpful to take an inventory on whatever it is that's gone on, because even though we're very used to kind of the idea of, rupture and repair, where it has to be this very large rupture, this very large conflict in order to have a sit down conversation about it. But it's not the truth, right? If we do these things consistently and we have these talks and we get comfortable having these talks, even when nothing is going wrong, it can be so helpful when the big things do blow up. So step number one, really kind of scheduling a plan, how to talk. Number two, if we're focusing on insecure attachment, is finding ways that you can self-regulate. I can't stress that one enough. A lot of anxious people think they need to work on their co-regulation first. They don't. They need to work on their self-regulation. The people that need to work on co-regulation are avoidants, and that's a different conversation for a different time, because avoidants hate co-regulating. So we'll leave that one there for a little bit. So number two, really learning how to self-regulate. So like we talked about before, going for a walk, listening to a podcast, just doing something that kind of cuts the obsessive thinking in your mind. And number three, for communication strategies, I think one of the most important things is taking time to learn how your partner processes, retains information, the tone they use. Um, are they a crier? Like, I'm a natural born crier. I used to think that I was like this kind of like angry, tough girl, but every time that I would get angry, I would just like burst out into tears. So it was actually quite confusing for the other person, because now they're like irritated with me because I was so angry and nasty to them, but now I'm crying. So it's really hard to kind of feel sorry for me now after all the horrible things I've probably already said. So it's really important for people to know what happens to you when you're freaking out inside. A lot of anxious people don't understand that other people need time to process. I will come back as a lawyer in my next life, because if somebody confronts me with something, I am very talented at thinking on the spot. And if I want to confront somebody about something, I'm also very talented at creating a 48-page document as to why you have hurt me and what you should do about it. And it took me a long time to realize that a lot of people don't operate that way, right? If I ask a big question, or I want to talk about something serious, I assume that the other person knows how to answer right on the spot. And a lot of people don't. And a lot of people need to take what you said. They need 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it is, right? I remember even when I asked the friend who wrote these amazing questions for the questions, I was expecting I was going to ask for the questions and they were going to be like, okay, here are your questions. And they said to me, they're like, yeah, sure, I can do that for you. Let me think about them and I'll get back to you when I've come up with them. And I was like, wow, there it is. People need time. And I should take more time too to answer the things people said, or the things that people ask me. I used to think that, and which would really fall into a lot of my people pleasing tendencies, that when somebody would ask me something, I would have to answer on the spot, or invite me somewhere. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, I'll be there. And then the day would come and I wouldn't want to go. And now I can take a pause and say, okay, thank you for the invite. Let me think about it and I'll get back to you. This intense urgency doesn't have to be there all the time. So third strategy is really learning how your partner, especially your secure partner or your more avoidant leaning partner, processes, because I can guarantee you, if you're leaning more anxious, their process is going to look different than yours. And once you start to understand their process, you can begin to take it a lot less personally because before I knew what was going on, if somebody would ignore me or not answer my huge paragraph text message, or God forbid, hang up on me, or whatever it was, when I was a 10 on 10 activated, I would take it so personally. And my mind would tell me either this person's never coming back, they don't love me anymore, this is never going to get resolved, and I would panic. And now, if I know that somebody needs time and they tell me that, when I bring something up and the other person says, like, okay, I hear what you're saying, I don't know what to say right now, or I need some time to think about my response, I will get back to you in 24 hours. Okay. I might not love it. Strategies are not about me accepting fully, right? Like, I'll probably always be the type of person who wants to resolve things on the spot, but life doesn't work that way. And I don't get what I want all the time. And I can't pretend or walk around like I'm going to get what I want all the time, because it's going to cause me a lot of problems in personal relationships. So I have learned to sit on my hands and as best as I can and give that person the space that they may need to process whatever the question is. And then by the time the next day rolls around, you're no longer activated. The other person has had time to think, and also time to think with respect, right? And what that means is you weren't blowing up their phone the entire time. You weren't panicking. You weren't making it about yourself. And then they can come back to the conversation with a very clear head as well. And that goes for their side too, learning if a secure person wants to be with an anxious leaning person, they're going to have to learn and understand and respect a lot of the ways that their anxiety shows up in the relationship. Otherwise, the relationship doesn't have a strong chance of lasting, because the person is always going to get very overwhelmed and turned off by the anxiety. So learning how to do that dance strategically is going to be super, super helpful. But at the same time, and I always share this with clients or with couples, is that it's so important that we're doing the work on our side of the street at the same time, right? I can't expect a partner to be able to walk me through an anxiety meltdown because of something that triggered me in the relationship every 5 days. I will push even the most securely attached person away at that point. So I have to really work on my side of the street. My partner has to work on their side of the street, right? So say they're very shut down or avoidant. Not that I do well with that pairing or want to be with that type of pairing anyways, but let's just say that I am. They're going to need to be actively working on their side of the street as well. And then we can come together as more of a team, right? Because someone who may not be able to handle me at a 10 on 10, if they tell me that they can handle me at a 7 on 10, then I got to do the work to stay at a 7 on 10. So just to recap, so first things first, with these communication strategies, really putting a plan together with your partner. When is the best time to talk about these things? We talked about weekly meetings, monthly meetings. Step two is, for an anxious person, is really learning and practicing that self-regulation, whatever that's going to look like for you. And number three, learning about each other's differences, because for a long time I was waiting for someone to be more like me, and chances are there's only going to be one me. Thank God for that, because if I was in a relationship with another me, we'd have a lot of problems. So, I need to learn more about my partner's style, and they need to learn a lot about mine, and that way we can depersonalize the times where we are in conflict or where we are activated. And we can remember, okay, yeah, Jess said she feels this way when I do this. So she's not necessarily mad. She's triggered from X, Y, and Z from whatever happened to her in their past. So yeah, so just really a lot of communication and keeping up with the communication. One last little tidbit that I see happen often is that couples will have a really big talk, and it'll be great and the repair will happen. But what will happen is that they won't have another talk for another year. And that's too long of a time without keeping up with these strategies, because a lot of them require a lot of practice and a lot of consistency and a lot of reminders. So kind of fourth little bonus tip is to, keep up with the consistency. And even though one conversation went really well, that's great. But try to keep up with them, month to month, bi-weekly, whatever that looks like. So thank you so much to my friend who sent in these amazing questions. Feel free to any of my listeners to do the same if you want another question answered on the podcast. And thank you so much for tuning in and listening. I love you all. And until next time. Thanks everyone for listening and supporting Living Out Loud. Be sure to tune in next week for another fun, juicy episode.